On a crowded beach at night, cruelty hid behind music lights and laughter.
Look at her
Three drunk
face, she
men
hates
cornered a
us.
young server, certain no one
I do
would
not
intervene.
stop pulling my.
Most
Look at her
people
face,
looked
she's
away.
actually gonna cry.
Phones were raised.
I can't
Silence
believe she
spread
thought
across the
anyone
sand.
cared.
But beside the flickering firelight,
joke.
a dog sensed the danger before it erupted. And the man who stood up was no ordinary beachgoer. He was a former U.S. Marine,
some of this?
someone who had learned that silence can be deadly. And in that moment, cruelty made a fatal mistake. Before we begin,
This
tell
one's
us
for
where
us.
you're watching from. And if this story moves you, please subscribe and stay with us until the very end. The ocean breathed steadily under the night sky, warm wind carrying salt smoke from beach grills, and the sour sweetness of spilled alcohol. Floodlights washed the sand in artificial gold, turning the shoreline into a place where everything felt louder and easier to forget. Emily Carter moved through the crowd with a tray balanced against her hip, her posture straight despite the ache already settling into her lower back. She was 23, tall enough to stand out, but slim enough to be ignored when people chose not to see her. Her dark blonde hair was pulled into a practical ponytail, though loose strands clung to her neck from the heat. Her skin was lightly tanned, freckled across the bridge of her nose, and her gray-blue eyes carried a tired alertness that came from working too many nights like this, nights where fun for others meant vigilance for her. Emily had learned how to smile without meaning it. She wore a fitted black t-shirt with the event logo printed across the chest, already damp with sweat, and the occasional splash of beer. The uniform marked her as staff, but tonight it also made her visible in the wrong way. The music thudded from oversized speakers, bass vibrating through her ribs as she navigated clusters of half-dancing, half-stumbling partygoers. She felt the first hand brush her waist and pretended it hadn't happened. That was the rule she'd learned early: acknowledge too much, and things escalated. Acknowledge nothing, and you might get through the night. "Hey," a voice slurred behind her. "You work here, right?" Emily turned, professional smile snapping into place. The man was in his mid-30s, sunburned despite the darkness, his tank top stretched tight across a soft belly. His eyes were glassy confidence, swollen by alcohol rather than earned. Two others hovered close behind him. One was tall and angular, sharp cheekbones, restless energy vibrating through his limbs. His grin was thin, impatient, like he enjoyed testing limits just to see which ones would bend. The third was broader, heavier face, flushed red eyes, darting constantly, as if looking for either approval or a fight. They moved as a group, blocking her path without fully acknowledging they were doing it. "Yes," Emily said evenly. "Can I help you?" The tall one leaned closer than necessary. "You already are." Laughter bubbled up around them, not from the men themselves, but from nearby groups who caught fragments of the exchange and found it entertaining. Someone nudged a friend. Someone raised a phone, not to intervene, just to capture atmosphere. Emily felt her chest tighten. She shifted the tray slightly, trying to angle past them. The broader man stepped sideways, casually cutting her off. His elbow knocked one of the cups, beer sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "Careful," he said, though his tone suggested the opposite. "I need to get these drinks out," Emily replied. She kept her voice calm, measured. "Please." The word "please" felt thin in her mouth. The shaved-head man laughed. "Relax, it's a party." Emily glanced around, searching instinctively for security, for another staff member, for anyone whose job it was to notice when things crossed a line. Faces turned toward her, curious, amused, detached. No one moved. She knew that look. The look that said, "This isn't my problem." At the far edge of the beach, where the floodlights faded into darkness, Jack Turner sat alone on a low folding chair, his boots buried in cool sand. He was 42, broad-shouldered, built like someone who had once been stronger and never fully let it go. His beard was dark with streaks of gray, trimmed close out of habit rather than style. His face carried deep lines around the mouth, and eyes, marks left not by laughter, but by restraint. His hair was cropped short, neat, in a way that suggested a past he didn't talk about. Jack wore a faded hoodie, zipped halfway, sleeves pushed up to reveal forearms marked with old scars. Thin white lines that told stories people rarely asked him to share. He sat still, but not relaxed. His posture was the posture of a man who always knew where the exits were. Beside him lay a Belgian Malinois named Rook. Rook was 6 years old, lean and muscular, his coat a deep mix of brown and black that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. His ears were upright, even at rest, eyes amber and alert. He didn't sleep at parties. He watched them. His body was loose, but his attention never drifted. Jack had noticed Emily earlier, though he hadn't meant to. Not because she was attractive, though she was, but because of the way she moved. Efficient, controlled. The way her smile appeared automatically and vanished just as fast. The way she adjusted her route through the crowd without seeming to think about it, avoiding certain clusters of men as if by instinct. He'd seen that before. Jack told himself to look away. He had learned over the years that stepping in usually made things worse, that drawing attention invited complications, that sometimes the safest choice for everyone was to stay invisible. Rook's head lifted slightly. Jack followed the dog's line of sight and saw the 3 men closing in around Emily. He saw the way her shoulders tightened, the fraction of a second where her professional mask slipped before snapping back into place. Someone laughed nearby. Someone shouted lyrics. The party rolled on. Emily tried again to move past, shifting the tray. A splash of beer spilled anyway, soaking into the front of her shirt. The broad man raised his hands theatrically. "Oh, damn," he said. "Guess that's on you." Heat rushed to Emily's face, a mix of embarrassment and something sharper. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She wiped at the wet fabric with a napkin, hands trembling, despite her effort to steady them. "I'll get you another drink," she said quietly. "Excuse me." The tall one leaned in, breath hot with alcohol. "Don't rush off yet." Jack felt something tighten low in his stomach. He shifted in his chair, then stopped himself. This was the moment. The one he'd recognized too many times in too many places. The moment before things tipped one way or another. Rook rose smoothly to his feet, silent. Emily's eyes flicked toward the darkness at the edge of the beach, not searching wildly, not pleading, just checking. They met Jack's. For a split second, everything else faded. The music, the laughter, the lights. There was no fear in her gaze, only recognition. The look of someone who understood exactly what it meant to stand in a crowd and still be alone. Jack looked away. Then he looked back. He understood that feeling too well, the feeling of being surrounded by people and yet completely abandoned by them. The moment when silence became a choice, not an accident. And he knew that if he continued to sit there quiet and unseen, the night would not end harmlessly. Jack rose from the folding chair slowly, not with the urgency of anger, but with the controlled economy of someone who had learned that sudden movements invited chaos. Sand slid off his boots as he stepped fully into the light. His shoulders were squared, his hands relaxed at his sides, fingers slightly curled, not fists, but ready. When he spoke, his voice didn't cut through the music. It didn't need to. "She's uncomfortable," Jack said. "Let her go." The words were plain, almost polite. For half a second, nothing changed. The bass continued to pound. Laughter from another circle of partygoers swelled and crashed like the tide. It was as if Jack's voice had been absorbed by the night and dissolved. Then the tall man turned. He looked Jack up and down with exaggerated slowness, eyes lingering on the hoodie, the beard streaked with gray, the dog standing alert at his side. His smile widened, sharp and performative. "You hear that?" he said to his friends. "This guy thinks he's in charge." The shaved-head man snorted. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" Jack didn't answer immediately. He felt Emily's stillness beside him, the way her breathing had gone shallow. He felt Rook's presence at his leg, solid, warm, focused. Jack kept his gaze level, not challenging, not submissive. "I'm someone telling you to step back," he said. That was when the crowd truly noticed. People turned, phones rising higher now, lenses pointed not at the party, but at the interruption. A ripple of attention spread outward. Some faces showed discomfort, others excitement. No one moved closer. No one moved away. Emily stood frozen, her tray still clutched to her chest. She felt exposed in a new way, not just to the men in front of her, but to everyone watching. If Jack failed, she knew exactly how this would be framed later. A misunderstanding, a joke, a man who overreacted, a woman who couldn't take a party. The broad man shifted his weight forward. He was taller than Jack by an inch or two, thicker through the chest, his jaw shadowed with uneven stubble. He smelled strongly of beer and sunscreen. "Relax, old man," he said. "We're just talking." "You're blocking her," Jack replied. His tone hadn't changed. The man laughed and took another step closer, close enough that Jack could see the broken capillaries across his nose, the twitch at the corner of his eye that suggested he was used to people backing down. "And what if we are Rook moved?" Not forward, not aggressively. He simply stood taller, head lifting ears, forward amber eyes locking onto the man's face. His body aligned with Jack's leg, a quiet line drawn in the sand. A murmur moved through the nearby crowd. Emily noticed it too, the slight hesitation, the recalibration. The men hadn't expected that. Dogs changed the equation. Dogs made consequences visible. "Call your dog off," the tall one snapped, though his voice wavered just enough to give him away. "He hasn't done anything," Jack said. "Neither have I. Yet." From the edge of the party, a woman finally stepped forward. She was in her early 30s, tall and lean. Her dark hair pulled into a messy bun that spoke more of long workdays than fashion. Her skin was pale against the neon glow, and the lines around her eyes suggested she'd learned to stay calm in crowded, loud places. She wore a staff badge clipped to her shorts. "Hey," she called out, voice firm. "What's going on here?" Her name was Sarah Collins, one of the senior event coordinators. She had a reputation among staff for being efficient, no nonsense, and deeply tired of babysitting drunk adults. Years earlier, she'd quit law school after a violent mugging left her with a permanent distrust of how slowly systems moved. Since then, she trusted instincts more than protocols. The shaved-head man turned toward her, immediately hands raised in mock innocence. Nothing. Just talking. Sarah's eyes flicked from him to Emily's damp shirt, to Jack, to Rook. She took it all in without comment. "Emily," she said, "you okay?" Emily hesitated. Every instinct told her to say yes, to keep things simple. She swallowed. "I need space." The words landed harder than Jack's had. The tall man scoffed. "This is ridiculous." Sarah stepped closer, planting herself between Emily and the men. Her posture straight chin lifted. "You heard her. The broad man's jaw tightened. "You're going to side with them. I'm going to side with my staff," Sarah replied. Every time, Jack felt a subtle shift in the air. Not relief yet, but the first crack in the illusion that everyone was willing to look away. Still, the music didn't stop. No sirens, no sudden rescue. Just people watching, waiting to see who would blink first. Emily's heart pounded. She understood now that this moment was bigger than her. It was about what happened when someone spoke, and the world decided whether to listen. Jack remained where he was aware of every breath, every inch of space. He knew this wasn't resolved. He knew voices alone rarely were. The tension stretched thin and dangerous across the sand, and everyone felt it. The shift was subtle at first, almost polite. The tall man angled his body away from Emily and toward Jack, as if deciding she was no longer worth the effort. His smile sharpened the kind that existed to draw a reaction. "You really want to make this about you?" he asked. Voice pitched, just loud enough for nearby phones to catch it. "Because that's what this looks like." The shaved-head man laughed and stepped closer to Jack's shoulder, invading space with practiced ease. He had the confident slouch of someone who had learned early that crowds protected him. "You're killing the vibe, man," he said. Nobody asked for a lecture. Jack felt the attention settle on him like a weight. The sound of the party shifted, not louder, but more focused. The bass still thumped, but conversations nearby had slowed people turning their bodies slightly toward the confrontation while pretending not to stare. Emily stood just behind Sarah now, the damp fabric of her shirt cooling against her skin. She realized with a quiet, sinking clarity that the men weren't really angry at Jack for interrupting them. They were angry because he had changed the story. As long as the attention stayed on her, she was the problem. Once it moved to him, they had something to perform against. Phones were up everywhere. A young man in a backwards cap grinned into his screen, narrating quietly. Two women nearby whispered to each other, eyes darting between Jack and the men. Someone shouted, "Chill out," though it wasn't clear who it was meant for. Emily's stomach twisted. This was the part that hurt the most, not the hands, not the words, but the way everyone seemed to agree silently that this moment was entertainment, that it was easier to watch than to choose a side. Jack sensed it too. He could feel the collective pressure, the unspoken demand for him to either explode or disappear. He had been in rooms like this before, where silence was a kind of vote. He thought briefly about stepping back, about letting Sarah handle it, about how quickly the tension would dissolve if he simply walked away. He knew how that story ended. Rook shifted his weight nails, pressing lightly into the sand. His gaze moved from face to face, cataloging changes in posture and tone. He didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. He waited. The broad man leaned in, voice dropping, meant only for Jack. "You got a hero complex or something." His breath carried beer and impatience. "Because nobody here cares." Sarah straightened, shoulders squared. "Back up," she said, sharp now. "All of you." The tall man turned to her, annoyance flashing. "This, your boyfriend?" Sarah's jaw tightened. She was used to being dismissed, to having authority questioned, the moment men felt inconvenienced. Her posture didn't waver. "I'm staff," she said, "and I'm telling you to move." A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. A man near the speakers muttered, "Just let it go," to no one in particular. Another voice added louder, "Stop ruining the party." Emily flinched. She realized then that the party didn't need the men to be cruel. It needed everyone else to stay comfortable. Jack met the tall man's eyes. He didn't raise his voice. "You can step back," he said, "or you can keep making this worse." The tall man laughed, spreading his hands theatrically. Hear that, he called to the crowd. He's threatening us. No, Jack said. I'm asking you to stop. The distinction mattered to him, even if it didn't to anyone else. The shaved-head man scoffed. You think you're better than us? Jack didn't answer immediately. He felt the old reflexes stirring the urge to end it quickly, decisively. He pushed it down. This wasn't that place. Not yet. Behind Sarah, Emily's hands trembled. She pressed them together, forcing stillness. She understood now that if Jack backed away, the men would turn back to her with something to prove. If he stayed, the focus remained on him, but so did the risk. She hated that his safety had become her responsibility in the eyes of the crowd. From the perimeter, another figure approached slowly. He was older, late 40s perhaps, with a sun-weathered face and a graying mustache. His build was lean, his posture careful. He wore a reflective vest half-zipped over a plain t-shirt, the badge clipped to it, reading Beach Patrol. His name was Mark Reynolds. Years on the job had taught him caution more than courage. He'd seen too many situations spiral when stepped into too aggressively. What's going on? Mark asked, voice calm but tired. The tall man turned instantly. This guy's harassing us, he said, pointing at Jack. Won't leave us alone. Mark's eyes moved over Jack, then to Rook, then to Emily's stained shirt. He hesitated, the calculation visible on his face. He didn't want this to be a thing. He wanted it quiet. Everyone, take a breath, Mark said. Let's all just, Sir, Emily said suddenly. The word cut through the noise more sharply than Jack's voice had earlier. Mark looked at her. She met his eyes, heart pounding. I asked them to stop, she said. They didn't. The crowd went still in a different way. Not silent, just alert. Mark exhaled slowly. He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. All right, he said. Let's separate. The tall man rolled his eyes. Unbelievable. But they didn't move. Not yet. Jack felt the moment stretch again, thin and dangerous. He knew better than to trust partial authority. He knew how easily this could slide back. He also knew that every second he stayed planted where he was made it harder for anyone to pretend nothing was happening. Emily watched the faces around her, some uneasy, now, some annoyed, some still filming. She understood with painful clarity that silence wasn't absence. It was participation. Jack stayed. The moment it crossed from words into touch, the night changed. It happened quickly, so quickly that some people later would claim they hadn't seen it at all. The man with the shaved head reached out and closed his hand around Emily's wrist, his grip firm enough to jerk her off balance. He laughed as he did it, like the pull toward the dark edge of the shoreline was a joke everyone was meant to share. Emily's breath caught. The sand shifted under her shoes, cold water licking at her ankles. Panic flared sharp and disorienting, not because of the pain, there was little yet, but because of what the gesture meant. He had decided she belonged to the moment, to the crowd, to his mood. Jack moved. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He stepped forward and placed himself between Emily and the man, his body angling, instinctively blocking line and leverage. Years of training guided the motion without asking permission. He felt the familiar narrowing of focus, the quiet click in his head that said this was no longer hypothetical. Let go, Jack said. The shaved-head man looked surprised, then amused. Or what Rook growled. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a low, vibrating sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest, a warning more than a threat. The dog's muscles were taut beneath his short black and tan coat, his ears forward, amber eyes fixed on the hand holding Emily. A ripple passed through the crowd. Someone swore under their breath. A woman near the fire pit took a step back, suddenly aware of how close she was. A phone dropped slightly, its owner uncertain for the first time whether filming was still a good idea. Mark Reynolds took 2 quick steps forward. Hey, he said, the calm in his voice cracking. Hands off, now. The man hesitated, weighing reactions. He glanced at his friends, then at Jack, then at the dog. His fingers loosened just enough for Emily to twist free. Sarah pulled her back immediately, one arm firm around Emily's shoulders. Up close, Sarah looked more worn than fierce. Early 30s, tall and slim hair pulled into a tight knot that never quite stayed neat through long shifts. Her skin was tanned unevenly from working nights near firelight and days behind the bar. But her eyes were steady now, sharp with a protective anger that came from too many nights like this. That's it, Sarah said. You're done. The tall man scoffed. Relax, she's fine. Emily shook adrenaline, making her hands clumsy. Fine felt like a word from another language. Jack stayed where he was, close enough that the men couldn't pretend he wasn't part of the equation. He felt the weight of eyes pressing in again, heavier now. This wasn't curiosity anymore. It was expectation. The shaved-head man sneered. You think you scare us with a dog? Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. He watched the man's shoulders, his stance, the slight shift of weight that signaled whether he'd push or back off. He'd learned long ago that words often made things worse. Behind them, someone shouted, "Dude, chill." Another voice followed. He grabbed her. The crowd fractured. Mark raised his hands, trying to widen the space. Everyone, step back, he said louder now. I'm calling this in. The tall man's smile faded. You don't have to do that. I do, Mark replied. His face had gone pale, lines around his mouth deepening. He looked like a man who knew he'd lose control of the night either way. Emily clutched Sarah's arm. She could feel the tide of attention shifting, not fully, but enough to make the air feel unstable. She realized that for some people, this had already gone too far. For others, it still hadn't gone far enough. Rook's growl deepened as the shaved-head man took a half step forward, again, testing. Jack mirrored the movement without thinking, closing the gap. He could feel his pulse in his ears, controlled, but heavy. This isn't a party anymore, Jack said quietly. It's over. The words landed differently now. They weren't a request. They were a line. A man near the speakers muttered, He's right, though. He didn't move. Another woman pulled her friend away, eyes wide. Phones wavered, some still recording, others lowering in uncertainty. Emily looked at Jack, really looked at him for the first time. Mid-30s, broad shoulders under a worn jacket, dark stubble framing a face marked by old, thin scars near the jawline, faded enough to miss unless you were close. His eyes were tired, not angry. That, more than anything, unsettled her. He wasn't enjoying this. He was enduring it. The shaved-head man spat into the sand. You think you won? Jack didn't respond. He knew better than to believe in winning moments like this. Sirens sounded faintly in the distance, not close enough to promise anything, but near enough to change calculations. Mark let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Everyone stay where you are, he said, though his voice trembled. Help is on the way. The men exchanged looks. The tall one shrugged, forcing a laugh that didn't quite work. This is bullshit, but they didn't advance again. The party had stalled, music still playing to no one dancing. Conversations had died mid-sentence. No one could pretend anymore that this was harmless. Jack stayed planted. Sarah kept Emily behind her. Rook stood silent and unblinking. The line had been crossed. Whatever happened next would not be undone by apologies or laughter. The bottle rose slowly, catching firelight and phone screens, its glass neck slick with condensation. It wasn't swung yet. That was the worst part. The hesitation made it a promise instead of a threat. Emily stood very still. Her hands had stopped shaking, not because she was calm, but because her body had run out of places to put the fear. She lifted her eyes and found Jack's. He was still there. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't reassurance. It was acknowledgement. Rook shifted closer, shoulder brushing Jack's knee. At 4 years old, the dog was in his prime, lean, compact muscle under a short black and tan coat, the kind of build meant for endurance rather than show. His ears were forward now, mouth closed, breath measured. He wasn't barking, because barking was noise, and noise wasted time. The man holding the bottle, Kyle. Someone muttered his name from the edge, grinned too wide. He was in his late 20s, athletic in a careless way, sunburnt skin peeling at the shoulders, blonde hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. The grin wasn't bravado. It was panic trying to pass as control. Kyle had never meant for things to go this far. That was exactly why they might. "Relax," he said, voice louder than necessary. "I'm not gonna—" The shaved head man cut in low and urgent. "Put it down." Kyle hesitated. Phones were everywhere now, held chest high above heads, faces lit blue. Someone had started a live stream. The red dot glowed like a warning light. A woman whispered, "This is getting bad." A man answered, "Just don't move." Mark Reynolds spoke into his radio, back-turned shoulders tense. His vest reflected the light in sharp broken lines. He looked smaller than he had minutes ago, a single barrier against a crowd that could decide to surge or scatter at any second. Jack kept his voice steady. "No one wants this," he said. "Not you. Not them." Kyle laughed, brittle. "You don't know what I want." Jack did. He'd seen it before, the moment when adrenaline demanded an ending, any ending, just to escape the pressure of being watched. He angled his body slightly, keeping his hands open, palms visible. Not submission, signal. Behind him, Sarah adjusted her grip on Emily, grounding her with a quiet pressure. Up close, Sarah's freckles stood out against flushed skin, her eyes sharp and dry. She'd grown up working nights, bars, events, places where lines blurred and women learned to read danger before it announced itself. Tonight, that instinct had hardened into resolve. Emily felt the crowd more than she saw it. A ring of breath-heat expectation. She realized with a strange clarity that even now people were choosing not to be first, choosing not to be last, choosing comfort over courage. The bottle tilted. Rook growled not louder, but deeper. A sound felt rather than heard. Kyle's wrist faltered. Jack stepped half a pace forward. Not enough to threaten, enough to change geometry. "You're not trapped," he said. "You can walk away." Kyle's eyes flicked to the phones, to Mark's radio, to the dark line of the water behind Emily. The surf hissed against the shore, steady and indifferent. "Don't tell me what to do," Kyle snapped. He lifted the bottle higher. A woman near the fire pit cried out. Someone shouted, "Drop it!" Another voice yelled back, Back off time stretched thin. Jack counted breaths. In, out. He felt the old training stir, angles, distance, timing, but he held it in check. Not yet. Every instinct told him that if he moved wrong, the night would shatter. "Hey!" a new voice called, firm and unexpected. A man pushed forward from the crowd. He was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, wearing a faded lifeguard hoodie despite the heat. His hair was dark and curly, flecked with gray at the temples. His name was Miguel Alvarez. He'd been a lifeguard on this stretch of beach for over a decade before an injury to his knee ended his patrol days. He still showed up, still watched. "Put it down," Miguel said, not to Kyle, but to the moment itself. "This isn't worth it." Kyle's laugh cracked. "Stay out of it." Miguel didn't move closer. He didn't raise his voice. "I've pulled bodies out of this water," he said. "You don't want to be one of the reasons." The words landed heavier than shouting would have. Kyle's arm trembled. The bottle wavered, light scattering through the glass. Sweat ran down his temple. He was breathing too fast. Emily closed her eyes for a second. She thought of the morning of coffee stains and sand in her shoes, of the normal life she'd expected to return to after the shift. She opened her eyes again. Jack was still there. Sirens grew louder. Not close enough. Close enough. Mark turned back to the group. "Help is coming," he said, voice hoarse. "Put it down." Kyle looked around. The shaved head man stared at the ground now. The tall man had taken a step back without realizing it. The bottle dipped, then rose again. Rook tensed, weight coiled. Jack felt it through the leash like a held breath. "This is your last chance," Jack said quietly. Kyle's face twisted, anger, fear, humiliation colliding. The bottle shook. The surf surged louder now, a wave breaking hard against the shore. No one moved. The bottle finally swung. It wasn't a clean arc, fear disrupted the motion, but it was enough. Glass cut the air, catching firelight in a jagged blur. Jack moved at the same instant Rook did not, because he commanded it, but because they had learned each other's timing the hard way. The dog launched low and fast, not at the face, not at the throat, but at the forearm teeth, closing through sleeve and skin with a precision that stopped the strike without turning it into something worse. Kyle screamed shock more than pain, and the bottle shattered harmlessly into the sand. Jack stepped through the collapsing space, one hand controlling the wrist, the other driving Kyle backward until balance failed. He didn't punch. He didn't rage. He took away options. The crowd recoiled as if a wave had broken at their feet. Rook released immediately at Jack's sharp exhale, backing off a half step, chest-heaving eyes never leaving Kyle. Sand clung to his muzzle. His coat gleamed under the lights. He stood ready, not triumphant, working. The shaved head man lunged, then stopped short when Miguel planted himself in the way, broad stance, arms out. "Enough," Miguel said louder now, authority filling the word. Years of pulling people from danger had carved a steadiness into him. It showed in his face, in the way he didn't flinch when the man cursed at him. Sirens cut through the night close now. Red and blue swept the wet sand, turning faces into masks. Mark Reynolds raised his radio and shouted coordinates, voice steadying as reinforcements answered. 2 beach security trucks rolled in first tires, hissing, followed by patrol cars that parked hard and fast. "Hands where we can see them," a voice commanded. The tall man dropped to a knee without being told. The shaved head man froze, palms out. Kyle sat in the sand, clutching his arm, eyes wide and wet. Officers moved with practiced economy, separating bodies. cuffing wrists, pulling the men away from the circle that had formed. Phones kept recording, then slowly lowered, as if the truth had become too heavy to hold up. Emily stood beneath the glare of a rescue light wrapped in Sarah's jacket. She was shaking now, not with fear alone, but with release. Her hair dark and wind-tangled, stuck to her cheeks. Her eyes were clear. She watched as the men who had treated her like scenery were led away, their bravado stripped down to muttered excuses. Sarah stayed close, one hand firm at Emily's shoulder. Up close, the strain showed in Sarah's face, the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the tightness of a jaw that had learned to hold. She looked taller in the light all angles, and resolve hair finally escaping its knot. She didn't look away. Miguel spoke quietly, with an officer pointing to the broken glass to the waterline. He kept his voice low, his posture open, translating chaos into sequence. Mark Reynolds stood nearby, hands on his vest, breathing through the come-down, the night's weight settling on him all at once. Jack stepped back as the scene stabilized. His hands trembled slightly now that they were no longer needed. He looked down at Rook and crouched fingers pressing into the dog's shoulder, grounding himself in the solid heat there. Rook leaned into the touch-tail, still eyes softening without losing focus. An officer approached female mid-30s hair, pulled tight under her cap. She took statements with the calm efficiency of someone who had learned not to let anger steer the pen. She asked Emily first. Emily spoke clearly, voice steadying with each sentence. She named what had happened. She didn't minimize it. When it was Jack's turn, he answered plainly. No embellishment. No apology. The officer nodded once, as if she recognized the cadence. As the last cruiser pulled away with the men inside the beach fell into an unfamiliar quiet. Music had stopped. Fire pits dimmed. People stood in small clusters, unsure what to do with their hands, with their eyes, with the knowledge that they had watched something real unfold. Emily looked around at them. She didn't accuse. She didn't plead. She met their gazes one by one, then turned away, choosing where to stand next. Jack clipped the leash and rose. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't look for approval. He took the long path toward the darker edge of the beach where the sand cooled and the noise thinned. Rook walked at his side, head-level pace even. They moved through the last spill of light and into the night where the surf resumed its steady work, indifferent and constant. Behind them the party dissolved. What remained was the reckoning quiet, unavoidable, and overdue. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or fire. Sometimes they arrive quietly through a stranger who refuses to look away, through courage that shows up before fear can finish speaking. Many believe that when we stand up for what is right, God is already standing with us, working through our choices, our timing, and our willingness to act. In everyday life, we are given these moments, more often than we realize, moments to speak, to protect, to care, or to stay silent. The miracle is not that danger disappears, but that goodness still finds a way to rise. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment about where you're watching from, or what this story reminded you of, and subscribe to the channel to support stories that choose light over silence. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps. May He give you courage when it's hard, compassion when it matters, and peace in your daily life. And may you always remember, even one voice spoken at the right moment can change everything.